I never expected that climbing a mountain would change my life. But out there, where the air is thin and the world is nothing but sky and rock, I found something I never knew I was searching for. It started as just another challenge, one more peak to conquer, one more test of endurance. But when the storm rolled in, and we were forced to spend nights trapped together in a tiny tent, things shifted. There, in the cold isolation of the mountain, I started seeing him differently. The way he moved, the way he spoke in the darkness, the way his presence filled the space. It was undeniable. Up here, away from the rest of the world, I realized something. On the mountain, he liked the size. This is a story of survival, discovery, and an unexpected love that grew in the harshest of places. A journey where two men face the elements and their own hearts. Stay with me as I tell you how everything changed on that mountain. And if you're ready for more stories of passion, adventure, and self-discovery, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The mountain loomed above us, a jagged beast of rock and ice, daring us to climb. I had trained for months, but no amount of preparation could truly ready someone for the unforgiving conditions of an ascent like this. The wind howled through the crevices, and the sun, though shining, did little to warm the freezing air. I glanced at Nathan, my climbing partner. He was securing his harness, adjusting his gear with practiced ease. We weren't close, just two climbers who had been paired together for this expedition. He had more experience than me, had tackled peaks higher than this one, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he always seemed so in control, or the way his deep-set blue eyes never revealed what he was thinking. "You good?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Yeah," I lied, gripping the rope tighter. The climb started off smooth. The rhythm of our ascent was hypnotic. One step, anchor, pull. The higher we went, the thinner the air became, and the more my lungs burned with every breath. We communicated mostly in short commands: hold, anchor set, moving. There wasn't much room for conversation when every second required focus. Hours passed, and then it happened. The storm hit faster than expected. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and in minutes the wind became a monster, tearing at us with icy claws. The temperature plummeted, and snow swirled in every direction, turning the world into a blur of white. "We need to set up camp," Nathan yelled over the storm. I nodded, my fingers numb as I helped him find a stable ledge. It was barely wide enough for a tent, but it would have to do. Setting up in these conditions was brutal, our hands clumsy from the cold, the wind fighting against every movement. But finally, we managed to crawl inside the tent, sealing ourselves away from the chaos outside. Inside, the tent was unbearably small. Our bodies were pressed close by necessity, our heavy gear taking up most of the space. I could hear Nathan's breathing, feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold outside. "Looks like we're stuck here for the night," he muttered, pulling off his gloves. His fingers were raw from the ice. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. We were trapped here, at the mercy of the storm, with no idea how long it would last. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if it was the mountain that made my heart race, or him. The wind screamed outside, shaking the fragile walls of our tent like it was trying to rip us off the mountain. Inside, everything was still, except for my pulse, which hammered in my throat as I sat across from Nathan in the tight space. We weren't supposed to be in this situation. The plan had been clear. Reach the next checkpoint before sundown, set up camp where the ground was safer. But the storm had other plans. Now, we were stuck here, forced into a closeness I wasn't prepared for. Nathan reached into his pack, pulling out a protein bar and breaking it in half before tossing a piece toward me. "Eat," he said. "We need to keep our energy up." I took it, my fingers brushing his for the briefest second. Just a touch. nothing more. But it sent a jolt through me, something sharp and unexpected. I pulled away too quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. "Storm's bad," I muttered, just to fill the silence. "Yeah." He leaned back against the tent wall, stretching his legs, which only made them press against mine. There was nowhere else to go. I tried to focus on anything else, on the sound of the wind, on the way the fabric of the tent shook, on the snow piling up outside. But my thoughts kept circling back to Nathan. The way his breath came in slow, steady intervals. The way his presence felt. Bigger in such a small space. After a few minutes, he broke the silence. "You climb a lot with partners?" "Not really. Usually solo." "Same," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Climbing with someone means trusting them with your life. I don't do that easily." I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of his words. "And yet, here we are," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He smirked slightly. "Guess we don't have a choice now." The wind howled again, making the tent groan. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the way our legs kept pressing together, the way his body heat seeped into my skin. I didn't expect what came next. "You keep looking at me," Nathan said suddenly, his voice quiet but sure. My stomach twisted. "What?" I forced out. "You heard me." His eyes were locked onto mine now, unwavering. "You've been watching me since we set up camp. You nervous?" He wasn't accusing me, he wasn't mocking me, he was just stating a fact, and I had no idea what to say. The wind raged outside, but inside the tent there was another kind of storm brewing. I just didn't know if I was ready to face it. The wind had eased just slightly, but the world outside was still a blizzard of white and shadow. The thin fabric of our tent barely separated us from the brutal cold, and in here, in this impossibly small space, there was nowhere to hide. Nathan's words still hung in the air between us. "You keep looking at me." He wasn't wrong. I had been watching him, stealing glances, studying his movements, his expressions. But I hadn't realized I was being so obvious. Now, under his gaze, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't before. "You nervous?" he asked again, his tone unreadable. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my answer. No, it's just, I don't know. You don't talk much. Makes me wonder what you're thinking." Nathan let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's funny, because I've been wondering the same thing about you." The air in the tent felt different now. He wasn't brushing off what I said. He wasn't making a joke or changing the subject. He was pushing it, testing something, and my pulse picked up speed because of it. I shifted, trying to get comfortable, but the moment I moved, my knee pressed against his. I froze, expecting him to pull away. He didn't. Instead, he exhaled slowly, then leaned back against the thin wall of the tent, stretching just enough that his thigh was now flush against mine. He closed his eyes, like he wasn't thinking about it. But he had to be thinking about it. There wasn't enough space in here to do anything without meaning to. I swallowed hard. "We're gonna be stuck here a while," Nathan murmured. "Might as well get comfortable." Comfortable. Right. Because it was just about comfort. Nothing else. I tried to focus on something else. On the storm, on the rations in my bag, on how long we'd be stuck in this spot before the weather cleared. But every thought, every distraction, kept coming back to one thing: the warmth of his body next to mine. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The storm outside raged on, but in here it was oddly quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. His breathing, the rustle of fabric when he shifted, the way his fingers occasionally flexed as if fighting off the cold. "Your hands are freezing," I said without thinking. Nathan opened his eyes, studying me for a moment. Then, without hesitation, he reached over and pressed his palm against mine. It was an instinct, something natural, something meant to fight the cold. But as soon as our skin touched, something inside me snapped tight. I sucked in a sharp breath. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of climbing, but they were warm, warmer than I expected. My own fingers curled slightly, like they wanted to hold on, but I forced myself to stay still. Nathan watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. "Better?" he asked. His voice was low, quiet. I could barely nod. We stayed like that, hands pressed together, sharing warmth, neither of us saying anything. I should have pulled away, should have laughed it off, but I didn't. I just let it happen, let the silence settle between us, let the space between us shrink even more. The air inside the tent felt heavier, and I knew, somehow, that we had just crossed an invisible line. This wasn't just about staying warm anymore. Nathan's fingers flexed slightly against mine, not pulling away, but not moving closer either, like he was waiting, testing something. And suddenly, I realized, he wasn't the only one wondering what the other was thinking. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow kept falling, but inside, in the quiet of our tiny shelter, something had shifted, something I wasn't sure either of us was ready to face. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The tent shook under the relentless wind, the fabric straining against the force of nature outside. Inside, it was silent. Nathan's fingers were still against mine. Neither of us moved, as if acknowledging what was happening would break something fragile between us. I told myself it was just about staying warm, that nothing about this was intentional. But that was a lie. We were both awake, both aware. This wasn't an accident. Then, just as I was about to say something, anything, to break the tension, a loud crack echoed outside. My breath hitched. Nathan instantly tensed. "That didn't sound good," I muttered. He sat up slightly, carefully unzipping the tent door just enough to peer outside. Snow whirled violently, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "Shit," he muttered. I leaned closer. "What? What do you see?" "The ledge." His voice was tight. "I think part of it gave way." A sinking feeling settled in my gut. If the ledge collapsed any further, we'd have no solid ground beneath us. I scrambled for my boots. "We need to check how bad it is." Nathan grabbed my wrist before I could move further. "We don't go out there in this," he said firmly. "We wait." His grip was strong, grounding. I swallowed, nodding. I hated feeling powerless, hated knowing the mountain had complete control over whether we lived or died tonight. But he was right. Going out there blind was a death sentence. So we waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The temperature inside the tent dropped further. I rubbed my arms, trying to keep the cold from seeping too deep into my bones, but it wasn't working. Nathan noticed. "You're freezing." "I'm fine." He exhaled. Then, without a word, he unzipped his sleeping bag and shifted closer to me. I stiffened as he pulled my blanket aside and motioned for me to move in. "Body heat works better than layers." I stared at him, my breath caught in my throat. Nathan wasn't hesitant. He wasn't second-guessing this. It was just survival, just logic. But I wasn't sure if I could pretend that's all it was. Still, I moved closer, pressing against him inside his sleeping bag. The warmth was instant, overwhelming. His chest against my back, his arm draped loosely over my side. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Relax," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "You're shaking." I was, but it wasn't from the cold anymore. His breath was warm against my neck. His hand rested lightly against my ribs, not grabbing, not pushing, just there. The tension between us was palpable, thick enough to drown in. "Nathan," I started, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. What was this? What were we doing? He was still for a long moment before he finally spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I know," he said. "I feel it too." My heart slammed against my ribs. The wind roared outside, but inside this small, fragile space, it felt like everything had just changed. And there was no turning back now. The wind had softened to a dull howl outside, but inside the tent, everything felt sharper. My breathing, the heat of Nathan's body against mine, the way his fingers curled slightly against my side, not moving away. I felt like I was suspended between two realities, one where we were just two climbers trying to survive, and another where we had already crossed a line we could never come back from. "I know," he had said. "I feel it too." Those words replayed over and over in my mind. I wanted to ask him what he meant, what we were doing, but I couldn't force the words out. Maybe because I was terrified of the answer. Nathan shifted slightly, and I felt his breath against the back of my neck. A shiver ran through me, and this time it wasn't from the cold. "We shouldn't," I started, but my voice was too quiet, too unsure. "Why not?" he murmured. I swallowed hard. My whole body was hyper-aware of his. "Because..." I tried to find a reason, but nothing came. Because we were climbers? Because we were stuck here? Because when the storm ended, this might mean nothing? I felt him exhale slowly, his chest rising and falling against my back. "Do you want me to move away?" he asked, voice so low it barely registered over the wind. The rational part of me screamed that I should say yes, that I should put space between us, act like nothing was happening. But the truth was, I didn't want him to move away. I wanted him closer. I stayed silent too long, and that was enough of an answer for him. Nathan's fingers moved, slowly, testing, brushing against my side through the layers of fabric. His touch wasn't hesitant, but it wasn't rushed either. It was like he was waiting, seeing if I would stop him. I didn't. My pulse pounded in my throat as he moved closer, his nose nearly grazing the back of my neck. The heat of his breath sent a shiver down my spine. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he whispered. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because I didn't want him to stop. I turned slightly, just enough to face him. The dim light inside the tent made his features look softer, but his eyes were intense, locked onto mine like he was waiting for permission. There was something undeniable between us, something neither of us had spoken aloud before now. But we didn't have to. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. But in the next second, his lips brushed against mine. Hesitant at first, just enough to make my breath hitch. It was soft, cautious, like we both knew how fragile this moment was. Then, he kissed me again, and this time, there was no hesitation. My hands gripped his jacket, pulling him closer. His fingers tangled in the fabric of my shirt, his breath warm against my skin. The cold, the storm, the danger outside, it all faded. In that moment, there was only him, only us. The kiss was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, urgent, searching, real. Nathan's hands gripped my jacket, pulling me in, as if we had been waiting for this moment far longer than just these last few days. The storm raged outside, but inside our fragile shelter, it was something else entirely. I barely knew how to breathe, let alone think. Every nerve in my body was on fire, overwhelmed by the heat of him, the way his lips moved against mine, not rushed, not hesitant, just right. When we finally broke apart, our breath mingled in the cold air between us. Nathan's forehead rested against mine, his fingers still gripping the fabric of my coat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Then he let out a small, breathless chuckle. Didn't think that would happen up here. I exhaled a shaky laugh, still trying to catch up with the reality of what we'd just done. Yeah, me neither. But now that it had happened, I wasn't sure I wanted to pretend it didn't. Nathan pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression unreadable. His blue eyes flickered between mine, as if searching for something. You regret it? He asked. There was a time, maybe just yesterday, when I might have said yes, when I might have forced myself to dismiss whatever this was as a mistake. But after everything, the trust, the closeness, the way I had felt safe with him even in the most dangerous place on earth, I knew that would be a lie. No, I admitted. I don't. Something shifted in his expression, something that made my pulse hammer. Relief? Want? I wasn't sure, but before I could say anything else, another loud crack echoed outside. We both stiffened. That's the ledge, Nathan said immediately, his voice sharp, alert. I lunged for the tent's zipper, yanking it down just enough to peek outside. The storm had calmed, but what I saw made my stomach drop. The snow had shifted. A section of our ledge had already crumbled away, and the ground beneath our tent had fractured. If we didn't move now, we wouldn't be able to at all. We have to go, I shouted. Nathan was already grabbing his gear. I shoved my boots on with shaking hands, adrenaline drowning out any lingering thoughts of what had just happened between us. Survival mode kicked in. Within seconds, we were out of the tent, ropes secured, harnesses locked. The wind was still howling, but the visibility had improved just enough for us to see the safest way down. We'll take it slow, Nathan said, all business now, his voice steady despite the imminent danger. I nodded, gripping the rope so tightly my knuckles ached. We started our descent. Every movement was precise, careful, our boots digging into the ice with each step. My breath came in short bursts, clouding the freezing air in front of me. But even as I focused on each movement, I couldn't shake what had happened back in the tent. I replayed the way he had looked at me, the way he had held me, the way he had kissed me like he meant it. And I realized something. I wanted more. Not just here, not just on this mountain, but when we got back, when this climb was over. But first, we had to survive it. Nathan reached the next ledge first, securing his footing before looking up at me. His eyes met mine. Come on, he called, holding the rope steady, and I trusted him. I took my next step, and suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me. I let out a gasp as my foot slipped off the ice, my weight jerking downward. My fingers scrabbled for a hold, but I was already falling. The rope snapped taut, yanking me hard against the cliffside. I got you! Nathan shouted, his voice strained. I dangled there, heart hammering, ice cutting into my gloves. I forced myself to breathe. Trust the rope. Trust Nathan. Slowly, painfully, I used my strength to pull myself back up, my arms burning with effort. Nathan kept the rope steady, guiding me until my hands finally gripped solid ground again. I collapsed onto the ledge, my chest heaving. Nathan crouched beside me, gripping my arm. You okay? I let out a shaky laugh, adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. Yeah, thanks to you. His fingers tightened slightly before he let go, but his eyes lingered on mine, filled with something unspoken. I knew it then. Whatever had started up here wasn't ending when we got down. Nathan stood, offering me his hand. Come on, let's finish this. I took his hand, and I knew, without a doubt, that when we reached the bottom of this mountain, I wasn't going to let him go. Not now, not ever. Some moments change everything. I had come to this mountain expecting a challenge, expecting a fight against the elements. But I had found something else. Someone else. And when Nathan and I finally made it back to solid ground, when we pulled off our harnesses and let out breaths of relief, we both knew. This wasn't just about survival. It was about us. Maybe what happens on the mountain doesn't always stay there. Maybe sometimes it follows you home. What do you think? Would you have taken that leap? Would you have trusted your feelings, even in a place where survival comes first? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more stories that push limits of adventure, of emotion, of love, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Because some stories, they're just getting started.